Hi everyone, my name is Amber, welcome back to my channel. This is my review of The Adventures of Amina al-Sirafi by Shannon Chakraborty. This book review is going to be entirely spoiler free. I may do a spoiler section on the end if there's something that I really need to talk about, but I will clearly mark that when we get there, if we get there. But what you need to know right now is I'm going to start with a quick summary of the book before I get into my own thoughts and feelings. The Adventures of Amina al-Sirafi is a brand new book by one of my all-time favourite authors, Shannon Chakraborty. She is the author of the David trilogy, which you can see here, and it's probably my all-time favorite fantasy series. It's absolutely fantastic, and so I was super excited for her to bring out her next book, which is Amina. This book follows a main character who is obviously called Amina al-Sirafi. She is about 40 years old and she is a retired pirate captain, and when I say retired, she hasn't retired with a bunch of riches that she has stolen or pillaged. She is actually retired to a broken down home in the countryside. She's living with her mother and her daughter, and she's trying to leave her pirating past behind her. But then one day an old woman shows up at her door and it says that her granddaughter is missing, and so she wants to hire Amina to go and find her granddaughter. Amina takes some time to think about it. She doesn't really want to leave her own daughter behind, but this older woman is promising Amina a ton of money, which would basically set her up for life, and she wouldn't have to worry about going back to pirating anymore. And also part of Amina does want to go back to the sea because she's not seen her ship in years and she's not been out at sea. It's where she really belongs. So there's a bit of conflict in herself, but in the end Amina does agree to take on this job, and she goes around gathering her old crew, and then she finds out that the job isn't actually as simple as it seems. There's other stuff involved, and as this is a fantasy book inspired by Middle Eastern mythology, you can probably guess that there are jinn involved as well as various other mythological creatures, and it's a lot more intense than Amina thought it would originally be. So that's where I'm going to leave you in terms of plot. If you want to read up more on it, then obviously check out the Goodreads or Storygraph pages, although to be honest I don't think either of those synopses would really tell you much about what happens in this book because it's basically just a journey that you have to go on by yourself. Okay, so now on to my thoughts about the book. I'm not even really sure where to start with these because my notes are just one entire gush. I love this book and I love the author, so writing this review was a struggle for me. I think it should be apparent by now to all of my regular viewers or subscribers that Shannon Chakraborty is one of my all-time favourite authors. I told you as much at the beginning of this video, but in case you didn't catch on, I am being entirely serious. And after having read all of her previous books in the David trilogy, I really trusted that Shannon, should I full name her? Shannon Chakraborty, would deliver something great. Although Amina did have a huge boost to fill because, like I said, one of my all-time favourite trilogies series, and I adore all of those characters, and so I wasn't sure if Shannon Chakraborty could pull it off a second time. Like, I thought she could, but I wasn't 100% certain, and I wasn't sure if Amina could compete with my favourites. I am very happy to report that she managed it though. I think something that really distinguished Amina from the other characters in the David trilogy is that Amina is older physically. I know some of the characters in the David trilogy are quite ancient, but Amina is a 40-year-old woman, and her crew are also all older because most of those have retired as well, and they've been working with her for years. So we're not following teenagers or young adults or people who act like that. Amina and her crew have lived full lives before we actually meet them, and so I think that really helped kind of take the focus away from the David characters, because I was definitely going in trying to compare the two, and then that just didn't happen because they were so different. Amina, for example, is retired, she's a mother, and she has had like 20 something years of seafaring, and a lot has happened in her past, so it was nothing like the David characters at all, which I really liked because I would have hated to have spent the entire book, which I think is about 500 pages, comparing the two. That's not to say that this book doesn't have connections to the David trilogy, though it follows the same mythology. It's set a lot earlier. I think this is set in the 12th century. I can't remember when the David trilogy is set, but I think the 1800s. Don't quote me on that. However, there are some connections there, particularly in the first chapter, which made me shriek. I just couldn't believe that we were seeing that in the very first chapter of the book, and then it kind of like eased off a little bit. I'm glad that Shannon kind of got that bit out of the way first because it was like the most epic moment for me. A long time fan of the series, and then the mythology slowly starts to weave in as we and Amina get introduced to more and more of the magic, and we notice a lot of similarities or crossovers from the David series. And I think Shannon Chakraborty did this really well because not everyone going into this book will have read the David series, so she clearly wanted to keep them quite separate and not have too many crossovers so that you can read this as a standalone series while also pleasing the superfans, because we were all very keen to read this book. So The Adventures of Amina al-Sirafi takes everything you love from a classic heist story, throws it into the ocean, and spits back a load of magic and sea creatures. Like I said at the beginning, the story starts by introducing us to Amina, and she's basically just hiding out from the world after she experienced some trauma in her past. You don't learn what that trauma is right at the beginning, but it does slowly start to seep out, especially as she starts to gather her crew from around the continent. We slowly start to see her open up to them and also to herself, which I thought was really nice. She's clearly trying to forget about it all right at the beginning of the book, even though some parts of her current retired life are constant reminders of what happened back in the day. So she's basically just lying to herself and unwilling to accept things. But seeing her crew, meeting them again and talking to them because they were also there to experience this, Amina really came to open up and actually deal with things that she had been avoiding for the past 10 years. I really liked the crew coming together and sorting out their relationships again because they had drifted apart over the years. Amina had shut all of them out and hadn't contacted any of them, and so obviously some of them were more upset than others about that, and that was one of my favourite parts of the book. But I also really enjoyed the initial mystery of what happened to the missing girl and the guy that kidnapped her. I kind of knew where it was going because I've read a lot of stories that followed the same kinds of beats, but once we actually got to the reveal and Amina figured out what was happening, it was still quite satisfying because it made a lot of sense and it didn't really come out of like left field or anything. This book is basically all systems go as soon as Amina accepts the job from the old lady, and we follow her gathering up her crew and getting herself into certain situations, quite challenging situations, immediately. And she also meets a bunch of new people because while she does go and gather her best friends, there's only 3 of them, and so she needs a whole crew to sail this pirate ship. And so we kind of see her getting to know the new crew and gaining their respect because while they've heard of her, they don't necessarily trust her. I don't think any of them have seen a female pirate captain before, so that's another kind of layer that she has to navigate with them. I really adore Amina and the love that she has for her daughter. That was a constant thread throughout this book, was Amina thinking about her daughter and doing everything she could to keep her safe and to try and get back to her safely, even though people kept threatening her and throwing curveballs in the way. Amina's focus was entirely on her daughter, and even though she was enjoying being back at sea and getting back to the life that she loved, her daughter was still the main focus, and I loved that. Even though the daughter wasn't really in the book that much, Amina thought about her a lot, and so I felt like the daughter, whose name I can't remember, was really a main character of this book, and I hope in the second book we will get to know more about her. I also adore the relationship that she has with her crewmates, like I've already mentioned, especially past relationships as well. Everyone is really close-knit and accepting of one another, and they also welcome people into the fold pretty much immediately once they know that they can trust them, which I really, really like. And they're also accepting of each other's less positive traits, so seeing the crew come back together was a complete joy. My favourite crew member was definitely Delilah. I thought she was brilliant. She's the mistress of poisons, and she just goes in and starts wanting to like kill everyone, which I can relate to. And there's also another crew member who I don't really want to talk too much about. I don't actually want to say anything about him at all because I don't want to spoil anything, but would it really be me if I didn't have a questionable ship? And that's all I'm going to say on that. I do have to point out that while this wasn't the case for me personally, I do think that some readers would be put off by the beginning of the book, because they'd probably find it a little bit slow paced until Amina actually leaves her house and starts gathering up the crew and then really gets to know what her mission is. I didn't find that slow at all. I really enjoyed the journey. I really like it when characters, well, I like heist stories where people have to go and gather each separate member of the heist or the group of friends or whatever, and then they have to get together and figure out how to take down something or find a missing person in this case. But I do think some readers would find it a bit slower. The story does follow a lot of the same beats as the City of Brass in terms of the pacing, and a lot of people found the beginning of the City of Brass quite slow as well, like the first 100 pages or so. I didn't personally have that experience. I was sucked in right away, but because people found that one slower, I imagine they would find this one slower as well, because the first 100 pages are definitely setting up the story and introducing us to everyone individually. I would recommend you keep going though, because honestly you're in for a treat. You're going to discover different countries and islands and the high seas, of course, different mythological creatures, and also the mystery of Amina's past, which is quite mysterious in the beginning. I kind of started to figure out what was going on before it was revealed, but that's only because I'm obsessed with the City of Brass David Bantam series. I knew what could be coming, and although I wasn't certain, I was fairly sure that's what had happened to Amina. Another thing that I really liked was that Shannon Chakraborty has chosen to focus on an older character. I say older, she's only like 40, 45, but I think it's very unusual for fantasy books, at least the ones that I read, to feature older characters in that way, particularly older women, kind of like in movies where the older woman is delegated to like school teacher or mother or grandma or something, instead of like an actual main character in and of herself. That wasn't the case here. Amina needed to be that much older in order to have experienced all that she experienced. There was no good her being like 19 years old and just starting out on her pirating career. She needed to have actually lived a life for all of this to make sense, and I really applaud Shannon Chakraborty for doing that. I think it was a really good choice. It was also really fun seeing all of the different characters not necessarily being top of their game, because they all had aches and pains and stuff, and they were in retirement, so they were ready to have like a relaxing life, and then they got sucked back into this that they weren't necessarily prepared for, but they would be happy to do because they were all such close friends. I really liked the setting of this one as well, I have to say. I like that it jumped around from place to place, whereas with City of Brass you don't really see that many places. You see like 2 or 3 over the course of the whole trilogy, but with this, Amina was going from one place to another to gather her friends, and then also to investigate what was going on with this missing girl. And it was all real places as well. You can actually look these places up on like Wikipedia or on Google Maps and have a look around and follow Amina's whole journey. I know that Shannon Chakraborty has put so much research into this book. I think it really shows that she really cared about the geography and getting all the information right, especially about shipbuilding and stuff, which I don't think she really knew anything about at the time, and the history of the area as well. It was all crafted really, really well, and I really enjoyed it. I also wanted to mention that I think you can probably read Amina as a standalone, to be honest. It's clearly going to be a series and there's other stuff that could be covered, but I think it wraps up really nicely as a standalone story, which I thought was really cool because a lot of fantasy books don't do that. They end on like a cliffhanger and you have to wait a year for the next book, but this one wrapped up really, really well, and I think that works well for the story as well, because I think or hope the series is going to be following Amina on each of her standalone adventures, because they're currently being documented by one of the other characters. And at the beginning of some chapters you can see Amina arguing with this person who's documenting it, which I think is really fun. So I hope the rest of the series follows that same format and we focus on like the main story in each book as though it's kind of like a standalone adventure, but they all come together and tie together because it's all related. So in case you couldn't tell, I gave this book 5 stars. I thought it was absolutely brilliant. I think some people probably won't connect with it as much. I honestly wouldn't recommend starting with this book if you're trying to get into Shannon Chakraborty's work. I would say City of Brass is much better in terms of gathering new readers and introducing them to this mythological world. However, if you want something that's a bit lighter on the fantasy front, at least for the first half of the book, and you want a good heist or mystery, then Amina would be a good one to start with. It's not as heavy on mythology until later on in the book, after you've had a chance to get used to the characters and figure out what's going on with the plot. So that's my review of The Adventures of Amina al-Sirafi. Let me know if you've read this one in the comments below. Tell me what you thought of it. I honestly can't wait for the sequel to come out, but I think I'm going to be waiting quite a while. I don't even know if it's got a title yet or a set release date, but I hope it does soon because I need to start building some excitement for that one. I'm also waiting for my signed copy of this book to arrive. It's not here yet, but I'm going to be posting that all over Instagram and Twitter when I receive it, and I can add it to my collection that's up here. Thanks for watching. I'll speak to you all in the next video. Bye.